My name is Blake Armstrong, and for as long as I can remember, I believed in the sanctity of our life. I worked long hours as a regional manager for a logistics firm in Atlanta, and I took immense pride in the comfortable home my wife, Melissa, and I had built together. Our daughter, Lily, filled our days with laughter, and our weekends were devoted to family barbecues and quiet moments that we thought bound us together. I trusted Melissa completely, until the day everything changed. IT began on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday. I was deep in meetings at work when my phone buzzed with an unexpected email. The subject line simply read, "A little surprise." Curious and a bit perplexed, I opened it. Attached was a single photo, a candid snapshot taken at what appeared to be a lavish hotel bar. My heart skipped a beat as I recognized Melissa's unmistakable smile in the image. But that wasn't all. Standing beside her was a man I'd never seen before, a man dressed in a sharp suit, his eyes confident and slightly smug. The caption, sent from an unknown email address, read, "Late meetings can be fun, don't you think?" My blood turned to ice. I immediately wondered, who would send me this? And why? For the next few minutes, my mind raced with doubts and suspicions. Melissa had often mentioned business trips and late meetings at work, insisting that she was simply handling extra work. But the photo told a different story, one of clandestine rendezvous and hidden indulgence. I couldn't shake the image of her laughing with that stranger, her hand resting on his arm, as if they were more than mere colleagues. The rest of the day at work became a blur. I tried to focus on the endless reports and presentations. But the email haunted me. Every tick of the clock, every buzz of my phone, felt like a reminder that my perfect life was built on lies. When I finally left the office, I drove home with a heavy heart. The neon lights of Atlanta reflecting my inner turmoil home. I found Melissa in the kitchen preparing dinner. Our daughter played quietly in the living room. I greeted her with a smile that felt forced, my mind already a storm of questions. "Honey, I got an email today." I began cautiously. "It had a photo of you with a man I don't know. What's this all about?" Melissa's eyes widened for a split second, and her smile faltered. "It's nothing, Blake," she replied, her tone too light. "It was just one of those work things, nothing personal." But her voice lacked conviction. I could see the faintest flicker of guilt behind her eyes, though she quickly looked away. That night, after Lily was tucked in bed, I sat in the darkened living room and replayed the email over and over on my phone. I zoomed in on the photo, scrutinizing every detail. The way Melissa's hair cascaded around her shoulders, the casual yet intimate touch between her and that unknown man. It was all too real. The evidence wasn't ambiguous. It was a declaration that my wife had been living a double life. I felt a storm of betrayal and heartache surge inside me, mixing with a cold, burning desire for truth. Determined to find answers, I began gathering every piece of evidence I could muster. I searched through our shared calendar and even looked at Melissa's recent text messages when she thought I wasn't watching. Every little discrepancy, her late nights, the hurried explanations, the evasive answers, formed a mosaic of deceit. My hands trembled as I saved screenshots and printed out the email. That single photo had shattered everything I once believed in, and I knew I needed to uncover the full truth behind these late meetings. In the quiet of the night, with the rain tapping against our windows, I made a vow to myself. I would uncover every hidden secret, expose every lie, and if necessary, make sure that those responsible paid the ultimate price. The perfect family I once cherished was now a lie, and I couldn't let the betrayal go unpunished. I went to bed with a heavy heart, knowing that my life had irrevocably changed and that the journey ahead would be one of relentless retribution. The next morning, I awoke before dawn, the weight of the previous night's revelations heavy on my mind. As I sipped my coffee, I replayed the email's content again and again. I couldn't shake the image of Melissa smiling in that hotel bar with the stranger. Determined to find answers, I decided to retrace her recent business trips. I examined our shared digital records, emails, calendars, credit card statements, and began noticing small inconsistencies. Dates didn't add up. Hotel bookings were made for places far too exotic to be routine corporate trips. Work. I maintained a calm facade, but inside I was a storm of anger and suspicion. I discreetly called a few colleagues from Melissa's department under the guise of general conversation. They mentioned that she had indeed been working late more often than usual. Some even casually noted that her boss seemed particularly interested in her progress, and that a certain evening had ended with a group dinner at an upscale venue. The pieces were slowly coming together, painting a picture of deception far beyond the occasional overtime. During lunch, I managed to access our family's online travel logs. What I found was astonishing. Several trips that Melissa had claimed were business-related actually had details that were curiously lavish. One itinerary showed a week-long stay at a luxury resort in Miami, with expenses that far exceeded any normal corporate expense. Another booking was for a boutique hotel in New York, details that she had never mentioned. I felt my heart pounding in my chest as I realized that these weren't routine trips at all. They were elaborate cover-ups. That evening, as I returned home a bit earlier than usual, I activated the security system's playback. I reviewed the footage from the past few weeks. Every time Melissa returned late, there was a brief clip, a glimpse of her sharing a laugh, a discreet embrace with someone I couldn't identify clearly, but whose presence was unmistakable. The images confirmed my growing suspicion. Her business trips were a sham. Unable to contain my anguish, I confronted Melissa in hushed tones after our daughter had gone to bed. "Vanessa, I need you to be honest with me," I said, my voice barely controlled. Her eyes flickered with a mix of fear and resignation as she tried to dismiss my questions. "It's just work, Blake. You know how stressful it can be," she whispered, but her tone was cold and distant. I pressed on, showing her the printed itineraries and screenshots of the lavish bookings. For a long, agonizing moment, silence reigned. Then, with a tear-streaked face, she mumbled vague excuses that only deepened betrayal. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at my desk, compiling every piece of evidence into a digital dossier. Each file, each photo, each email confirmed what my heart already knew. Melissa had been lying for 3 years, and her late meetings were not about work. At all. As I read through messages again, snatches of conversation that hinted at secret rendezvous, I felt my resolve harden. I knew then that I would not be the passive victim of this betrayal. I would collect every shred of truth and, when the time came, make sure that every lie was repaid in full. In the quiet darkness, with the only light coming from my computer screen, I vowed that I would confront her, and if necessary, her mysterious lover, head-on. My perfect family was a lie, and the path of retribution had been set in motion. In the following weeks, my investigation evolved into an obsession. I transformed my home into a war room. Hidden cameras were installed in every corner, and I meticulously logged every moment that Melissa was away. The surveillance footage was damning. Each time she returned late, I caught glimpses of her smiling, laughing, and occasionally exchanging what looked like intimate touches with a man whose features were often obscured but clearly not mine. The evidence painted a vivid picture. While I was at work, Melissa was living a secret life. I began to track her movements with a relentless precision. Using the GPS data from our car and cross-referencing it with her digital itineraries, I discovered that the so-called business trips were booked at luxurious locations, destinations that had nothing to do with her job. I saw that she had flown to exotic cities, stayed in high-end hotels, and even dined in restaurants that were far too expensive for a casual corporate outing. Every new discovery was like another shard of glass in my heart, each one fueling the fire of retribution that now defined me. One evening, while reviewing yet another set of receipts from one of these trips, I found something I couldn't ignore. A photo. It was sent to me via an anonymous tip from someone who claimed to have worked behind the scenes in her department. The image showed Melissa with her boss, a well-dressed man whose confident smile masked everything. The setting was a dimly lit conference room at a fancy hotel, and the caption read, "Late meetings aren't always about work." The photograph was the final piece of the puzzle, confirming that the business trips were nothing but facade, and that Melissa was not only having an affair, but was also entangled with her boss. With the evidence in hand, my emotions surged from sorrow to a cold, calculating rage. I began to prepare myself physically and mentally for the inevitable confrontation. I enrolled in a boxing class, training relentlessly so that I could be ready to face whoever dared to shatter my life further. Every punch, every drop of sweat, was dedicated to reclaiming my honor. My transformation was as much internal as it was physical. I was no longer the man who trusted unconditionally. I had become an avenger, and the betrayal was a wound that demanded to be repaid in full. Late at night, I would sit in the silence of my study, the dim light reflecting off the pages of my journal where I had recorded every suspicious detail. I read the messages, reviewed the photos, and felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the full extent of Melissa's deception. The man in the photo, her boss, was now part of a conspiracy that had torn our family apart. I vowed that he, too, would have to answer for his role. In the solitude of that dark room, as the rain drummed softly on the window, I made a promise. Every lie would be exposed, every deceitful act met with retribution. The perfect life I once knew was gone, replaced by a relentless pursuit of justice. I couldn't let her continue to live a double life, while I was left to suffer in silence. The time for confrontation was drawing near, and I was prepared to strike, physically and with every ounce of my being. The day of confrontation arrived with a bitter chill in the air. I had arranged a meeting with Melissa under the pretense of a calm, rational discussion, but inside, my heart was a maelstrom of fury and betrayal. I waited for her in our living room, a space that once radiated warmth and laughter, now transformed into a stark, cold arena of truth. In my hands, I clutched a thick folder filled with every piece of evidence I had painstakingly compiled. Printed itineraries, surveillance photos, text messages, and even that final, damning photo of her with her boss. When Melissa finally walked in, her face was pale and her eyes held a flicker of fear. "Blake, what's going on?" she asked softly. I didn't waste a moment. "I have the truth right here," I said, laying the folder on the coffee table. One by one, I showed her the evidence. The lavish hotel bookings, the mysterious receipts, the surveillance clips of her secret meetings, and a photograph that shattered any remaining doubt. With every page I turned, every image she saw, I could feel the tension in the room intensify. Her eyes filled with tears as she tried to form an explanation, but the damning evidence left her speechless. I pressed on, my voice rising with controlled fury. "Explain this, Melissa. Explain why you lied to me for 3 years. Who is he? Who is your real lover?" The room was heavy with silence as she hesitated, then finally whispered, "Wasn't supposed to be like this. I was lonely. I needed someone who understood me." Her words were a feeble attempt at justification, but they only served to fuel my rage. In that charged moment, I knew that apologies and half-hearted excuses wouldn't mend the broken trust. I delivered a final ultimatum, a promise that every lie, every stolen moment would be repaid in full. "You have shattered our family," I said, my voice cold as ice. "I'm not here to beg for forgiveness. I'm here to collect the price for every deceit, every secret you've kept. And trust me, that price is steep." Melissa's tearful eyes and trembling hands could not mask the truth that was laid bare before us. I left the room that night with a heavy heart and a determination that bordered on madness. I knew that I still had to confront those who had enabled her betrayal, especially the man in the photograph, her boss, who had orchestrated these late meetings to further his own ambitions. The final chapter of this betrayal was yet to be written, and I was prepared to be its author. As I locked the door behind me, the cold night air felt like a baptism of my newfound resolve. I stepped into the darkness, determined to track down every last piece of evidence and every conspirator who had contributed to the destruction of my family. The perfect life we once had was gone, replaced by a legacy of lies and betrayal. And I vowed that no one, not even those hidden behind corporate facades, would escape the full measure of retribution. In the days that followed, I dedicated myself to the final phase of my plan, hunting down a man who had not only been complicit in Melissa's deception, but who had actively encouraged it. I learned that her boss, the man from the damning photo, went by the name of Scott Ramsey, a rising executive in her company with a reputation for charm and ruthlessness. Every piece of evidence now pointed to him as the mastermind behind those late meetings, a man who had exploited my wife's loneliness and ambition for his own gain. And I tracked Scott's schedule meticulously, combing through corporate reports, social media profiles, and even discreetly speaking with former colleagues. It wasn't long before I discovered that he had an upcoming business event at an exclusive hotel downtown, a perfect opportunity to confront him in a setting away from prying eyes. I prepared myself for that final confrontation by intensifying my training. Every session at the gym was a reminder that my body was now a weapon forged in betrayal and grief. On the night of the event, I arrived in a black sedan, blending into the upscale crowd, as if I belonged there. My eyes were fixed on the grand entrance of the hotel, waiting for the moment when Scott Ramsey would step out. The atmosphere was electric with the hum of business chatter and the clink of champagne glasses, but to me, it was just a stage for the final act of retribution. After what felt like an eternity, I finally saw him, a tall, sharply dressed man with an air of self-assurance. Scott's presence was magnetic, and he moved through the crowd as if every eye were fixed on him. I trailed him discreetly until he stepped onto a quiet balcony overlooking the city, with the rain softly tapping against the glass. I knew the time had come. I approached with a calm, controlled fury. "Scott," I said in a voice as cold as steel, "I'm Tyler Monroe, the husband of Melissa, and I have all the evidence of your betrayal." His eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed as I produced a folder of damning proof. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant rumble of thunder, as if nature itself were holding its breath. The confrontation escalated quickly. Scott tried to deflect, offering shallow apologies and empty excuses, but my resolve was unyielding. I advanced, and in that cramped, rain-soaked space, a brutal fight erupted. The struggle was swift and savage, a blur of fists, shouts, and the clamor of retribution. Each punch I landed was fueled by 3 years of betrayal. Every blow a promise that no one would escape the price of deception. I forced him against the balcony railing, my anger and grief intertwining into a force that he couldn't withstand. As the fight reached its climax, I looked into his eyes and whispered, "This is just the beginning." I left him battered and broken, a living testament to the cost of betrayal and the aftermath of that night. As I drove away through a storm of rain and regret, I realized that my quest for retribution had consumed every part of me. I had become an avenger, a man defined not by love, but by the unyielding need to see every lie repaid in full. I knew that nothing could restore the family I once cherished, but I was resolved to make sure that every traitor, every accomplice in his elaborate deception, would pay the ultimate price. Driving home along the dark highway, I reflected on the journey that had led me here. Every memory of the perfect life I once had, every moment of joy and trust, was now replaced by scars and relentless vengeance. Yet, as the storm eased into a steady drizzle and the first glimmers of dawn broke through the darkness, I vowed that I would continue on this path. In a world where betrayal shatters trust, an avenger must never rest until every secret is exposed and every stolen moment is repaid. With that grim promise echoing in my heart, I merged onto the freeway, determined to see justice done, no matter the cost. The storm had finally passed, but its memory lingered on my skin like a bruise that would never fade. In the aftermath of that brutal confrontation with Scott Ramsey at the charity event, I found myself wandering the silent streets of Atlanta under a pale, uncertain dawn. Every mile on the highway was a reminder of the violence I'd unleashed and the irreversible choices that had set me on this dark path. I had become an avenger, a man whose heart was no longer capable of love, but only of cold, unyielding retribution. Returning to my home felt like stepping into a mausoleum. The familiar warmth that once filled our living room was replaced by a heavy silence and the lingering echoes of shattered trust. Vanessa, my wife, had disappeared from our daily lives, and our daughter, once the light of my world, now moved through our home like a ghost, unaware of the true cost of betrayal. The evidence I had amassed was undeniable. Emails, screenshots, and hidden camera footage that painted a damning portrait of a life built on lies. Yet, as I stared at the collection of these painful relics, a part of me began to wonder, had my thirst for retribution completely consumed the man I once was? In the weeks following the public confrontation, I buried myself deeper into pursuit of every secret and every accomplice. I spent countless nights in my study, the only light coming from a flickering desk lamp as I organized my dossier. Every piece of evidence had a story, and every story had a cost. The weight of that knowledge was crushing, yet it drove me relentlessly forward. I knew that there were still loose ends to tie. Other players in this sordid game who had enabled Vanessa's deception, who had profited from her betrayal. I couldn't let them hide in the shadows any longer. Determined, I resumed my investigations with renewed vigor. I began calling in favors from contacts in the security and finance sectors, pulling credit card records and booking logs that confirmed a pattern of luxurious, unaccounted-for expenses. Each new discovery was like another shard of glass in my heart, a reminder that while I had built my life on trust, it had all been a carefully constructed illusion. I discovered that Vanessa had not only been meeting with Scott, but had also arranged secret getaways with another man, a quiet but well-dressed individual whose identity remained obscure by layers of aliases. The web of deceit was wider than I had ever imagined, and every thread I unraveled only deepened my resolve to see this through to the bitter end. I began to feel the physical toll of my relentless pursuit. The nights of boxing sessions and grueling workouts at the gym had made me stronger, but they had also etched deep lines of exhaustion into my face. Every bruise, every scar on my knuckles was a testament to the price of vengeance. I stared into the mirror each morning, barely recognizing the hardened, relentless man who looked back. The person I once was, a loving husband and devoted father, seemed like a distant memory, swallowed by the cold resolve of an avenger. But I couldn't allow sentimentality to weaken me now. The lies built on deceit had to pay the price, and I was the one to collect point one overcast afternoon. While reviewing the latest batch of surveillance footage, I caught a glimpse of an unfamiliar figure entering a nondescript building near the downtown core. My heart pounded as I zoomed in. It was one of the individuals linked to Vanessa's secret life. A man whose face I hadn't seen before, but who, based on voice and subtle cues, I suspected was deeply involved in the network of lies. I saved the clip, determined to follow every lead. This new piece of evidence was the final spark I needed to push me over the edge. If Vanessa's betrayal had been allowed to spread unchecked, then everyone involved would have to face retribution. I reached out to the private investigator I'd trusted from the start. We met in a dingy parking lot beneath a flickering street lamp, and I handed him the clip. "Find out who this is," I said, my voice low and controlled, but inside, my anger surged. He nodded silently, his eyes understanding the gravity of my request. With his help, I hoped to expose the last remaining piece of puzzle, and then I would act. That night, I couldn't shake the images from my mind, the faces of those who had betrayed me, the covert smiles, the hidden meetings. I went to bed with the dossier spread across my desk. Every page a reminder of a love turned to ashes. My dreams were haunted by memories of happier times, of promises made under starlight and family laughter echoing through our home. But those dreams were now replaced by a single unyielding thought. Every lie must be repaid, and no traitor shall escape justice. Morning came slowly, gray and unpromising. I rose with a sense of grim determination, knowing that today might be the day that sealed the fate of everyone involved in Vanessa's double life. I dressed in dark clothing and set out with a clear plan: to follow the new lead, to track down the unknown conspirator, and to bring him into the light. My phone buzzed with updates from the investigator. Each message tightened the web of evidence I had so painstakingly woven. The clues led me to a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a place where secrets were traded like currency. That I drove there with a cold precision. Every mile on the highway a reminder that I was now on a path of no return. The warehouse loomed in the distance, its broken windows and rusted doors a stark contrast to the polished world of corporate lies that fueled Vanessa's deceit. I parked discreetly, pulling on a dark jacket that blended into night, and approached the building with cautious determination. Every step echoed in the quiet darkness as I made my way toward the entrance. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old machinery and decay, a place where hidden truths could be uncovered. I crept along narrow corridors, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. Every shadow seemed to conceal a secret. Every creak of the floorboards a whispered confession. I found a room filled with stacks of files and dusty ledgers. It was here that I believed the final piece of the puzzle was kept, a ledger containing the names and details of every individual involved in Vanessa's double life. My pulse raced as I sifted through the records, my mind slowly piecing together the full extent of the betrayal. In that moment, I realized the depth of the conspiracy. It wasn't just about a secret affair. It was about an elaborate network that had profited from lies and deception. The ledger listed not only corporate names, but also addresses, bank details, and even coded messages. I knew that exposing this network would send shockwaves through the very foundations of the life Vanessa had built on deceit, and I vowed to be the one to deliver that shock. Armed with a ledger and the knowledge of the full extent of betrayal, I left the warehouse. The cold night air hit me as I stepped back outside, and I felt the full force of my determination. I drove home, the city lights blurred by rain, my mind already racing ahead to the final confrontations that would decide the fate of every traitor involved. Each mile along the dark highway reminded me that there was no turning back. The perfect family I once cherished was gone, replaced by a legacy of lies and bloodshed. I had transformed into a man defined by vengeance, and as I merged onto the freeway, I silently vowed that I would not rest until every single person who had shattered my trust was made to pay the ultimate price. My journey of retribution was far from over. The road ahead was long and dangerous, but I was ready to walk alone, armed with the truth and fueled by an unyielding need for justice.